hello, happy Sunday. It is so very good to be here with each and every one of you. It is so very good to be here on another Sunday as we gather together in consciousness, as we gather together as one community, as we gather together in this space. I invite you here and now to join me with our centering prayer as we use this to take us into the message. And so please repeat after me. I welcome the Spirit of truth into my mind and let it grow in my heart. Thank you, God, in me, through me, and as me. Amen. Ashe. And so it is. So it is. Well, of course, I always love to review first, as we have had two sermons in this series, Crisis-Proof Faith, Building Spiritual Strength Before You Need It Most. We started in week 1 with the time to prepare is now, using the quote from Doug Copeland, which sort of anchors this series, that the time of crisis, and I'm paraphrasing, is not the time to suddenly develop a spiritual practice. He says you can't suddenly develop a spiritual practice in the moment of crisis. And so we recognize that if we are in crisis, yes, we must absolutely begin to lean in on our spiritual practice or begin those practices. It's going to be a little more difficult. It'll take some time. But more importantly, and what the quote is really inviting us to understand, and the reason why at CSC, one of our guiding principles is daily spiritual practice is not an option, is because when times are good or just okay, right, or neutral, we want to make sure that we're doing those things that support us so that when the crisis shows up, we have the spiritual strength to respond. We have the spiritual strength to endure. We have the inner resilience that allows us to access ideas and information and insight. Last week, weatherproofing your mind, we took the idea and the metaphor of thinking about how a home must be cared for, and how a home requires all sorts of weatherproofing depending on what season you're in or where you may be living on planet Earth. And so this is similar to what we must do with our minds as we think about our spiritual practices and we think about our awareness, because we recognize that one of the foundational principles of life itself is that all is mind, the universe is mental. And so what's going on in our mental world, individually and collectively, it's going to show up in the external world. And so we have the opportunity to weatherproof our mind. We have the opportunity to make sure that we're maintaining our awareness, our awareness of truth, maintaining our awareness of what's possible for ourselves. And we're not swayed by what's happening in the world. And more importantly, we're not then, when we don't weatherproof our mind, as I said last week, then we move into these places of thinking that we're experiencing bad luck. We move into these places of thinking that God is punishing us and rewarding others, or God is mad at us. None of those things could be true, but they're the outpicturing of a mind that has not been weatherproofed, or a mind that may have been neglected. At one point you may have weatherproofed your mind, but you did not continue to work the work. And so, as I said earlier before the song, we're going to go at a kind of different space today. And I trust that this will meet you where you are and you will find great benefit from it. And so I was reminded of the stories of healing in the Second Testament. Jesus, of course, we know, is and was a healer, right? Everyone kind of knows that about Jesus, regardless of whether you were raised in Christianity or not. And there's something very interesting about his healing. Of course, he healed the blind, he healed the sick, according to the stories, he raised the dead. But there's something interesting and specific about how he healed that I want to bring your attention to. Now, in Matthew 9, we read the story of Jesus healing 2 blind men. And the 2 men, they walked up to Jesus and they cried out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." And Jesus responded with a question. Do you believe that I am able to do this? Now, in another gospel in the Second Testament, in the gospel according to John, in John 5, we have another healing story. It's a famous encounter that I'm sure almost all of you know or are aware of. It's the story of the man who was sitting beside the pool in Bethesda. And according to the story and the legend and the The lore is that this pool at a certain point in time was quickened by the Spirit of God and had healing properties, but it was only at a certain period of time. And whoever got in the pool at that particular time would be healed of their sickness, their affliction, their infirmities, their dis-ease. But this man had been sick for 38 years and was so unwell, he was not able to place himself in the pool. And so he was sitting there next to the pool, but unable to be healed. And so according to the story, it simply says he was sitting there for quote unquote a long time. And Jesus encounters this man by the pool in Bethesda. And again, he asks him a question. Do you want to be made well? Two questions, two stories of healing. In the first story of healing, Jesus asks, do you believe that I am able to do this? In another healing story, Jesus asks the question, do you want to be made well? Now, as metaphysicians and practitioners of New Thought, we know why Jesus asked these questions. We know that the healing power was always located in their own minds and not any power that Jesus possessed. Now, that may sound like a radical statement, but we read in the Second Testament the words of Jesus that says, it is not I, but the Father within me that does the work. Jesus said, I don't have the power. Jesus also said, apart from my Father, I can do nothing. Again, it's clear that Jesus did not have the power. And so by asking the questions, he was awakening a sense of belief and possibility within those that were seeking healing. And ultimately, it is out of their very own minds that the healing takes place. So as we are focused on building crisis-proof faith this month, as we are focused on building spiritual strength before you need it most, I ask you the same question today. Do you want to be well? And ask the question another way and simply say, do you truly want crisis-proof faith? Do you truly want to build spiritual strength before you need it most? Because we can assume that this is the series of the month. We can assume that everybody wants this. You could assume that you want it, but check in with yourself right now. Do you want to be well? Do you truly want crisis-proof faith? Do you truly want to build spiritual strength before you need it most? And after you have checked in with yourself, if your answer is yes, then there is something very specific that we need to address. You see, in the first two sermons of this series, I've focused on your daily spiritual practice, and I focused on creating a thought system that is loving, inspiring, beneficial, constructive, and life-supporting, weatherproofing your mind. But there's an elephant in the room, and we can no longer ignore that elephant. You see, crisis-proof faith requires you to address and heal trauma. Take a breath. I'm going to say it again. Crisis-proof faith requires you to address and heal trauma. Now, what is trauma? I'm going to take you back to, we come back to the wisdom and the words of Dr. Gabor Maté. Often, for those of you, if you remember the Job series, the God trauma series, we use the same definition. Dr. Maté says that trauma, from the Greek word for wound, is not what happens to you. It is what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. It is not the blow on the head, but the concussion I get. That, he says, is good news. If my trauma was that my mother gave me to a stranger, that will never not have happened. But if the wound was that I decided as a result that I wasn't worthwhile as a human being, I wasn't lovable, that's a wound that can heal anytime. Crisis-proof faith requires you to address and heal trauma. And when we say to address and heal trauma, you cannot change the factual events of what may have happened in your life as an adult or as a child. But the meaning that you've applied, in this case, he says, right, if because my mother gave me to a stranger, I decided that I wasn't worthwhile as a human being, I decided that I wasn't lovable, that's the wound. That's actually the trauma, not the event. And that can be healed anytime. So why does crisis-proof faith require you to heal trauma? And I want you to hear something else that I said. Notice that I said it requires you to heal trauma. I didn't say it requires you to heal your trauma. We're not even identifying it with as though it belongs to you. It requires you to heal trauma. There may be wounds, but once the wound is healed, it no longer exists. It doesn't belong to you. So we're not going to take ownership of it in that way. We're going to become aware of it and heal it. Crisis-proof faith requires you to heal trauma. Why? Because until you heal the trauma, you will interpret the events of your life and the events of the world through the lens of that trauma, which means you will not be able to see what's really going on. You will be experiencing your unhealed perception of life instead of a healed perception of life. And then you will react from that unhealed perception versus responding from a healed perception. And so this is why crisis-proof faith requires us to heal trauma, because the trauma becomes the way that we see the world. And so we don't really know what's going on, because we hear something in the news and it's triggering trauma, unhealed trauma. We have an experience, a bad date, and we can't really interpret what's going on because it's triggering the trauma, which is then causing us to react versus respond. It shuts us off from divine wisdom and guidance and insight. It shuts us off from love. And we see this play out in the world over and over and over and over again. I had many examples that I could use, but I wanted to zero in on this particular example because of where we are in this time in history. 5 years later, Black Lives Matter isn't as popular as it was in 2020. And part of the reason for this is that many of the people who took to the streets and took up the fight for Black lives were really reacting from their own triggered trauma versus responding from love. Now, it may not have been apparent back then or in the moment, but we can see it clearly now. Because see, if they were responding from love, love never ends. Love never exhausts itself. The spiritual text says love endureth all things. But when it became too much, when it was no longer sexy, when the adrenaline rush of reacting had faded away, Black people were left right back where we were before Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd were murdered, affirming the worth and value of our Black lives by our damn selves. And it's interesting, right? That adrenaline rush of reacting faded away. This is the same thing that happens when people turn to or misuse drugs and alcohol. It numbs the pain. It may even support you in ignoring the pain, the wound, the situation for a while. But eventually it fades. And then you still have the pain again. You still have the unhealed trauma. You still have the unaddressed trauma. And again, we see this over and over and over again. It's a cycle. But I thought it was important to name that right here and right now. It's also important to name, and as much as I'm naming it, I'm not naming this from a bitter place, because through crisis-proof faith, we do not allow bitterness and resentment to set in, because we know even while we may be right, to live in that rightness and expecting those folks who are unhealed to change would be like drinking the poison, expecting them to die. I would never expect an unhealed mind or an unhealed perception to act any other way than it does until there's healing. In the same way that when a child is learning to walk, we do not expect them to be able to run or walk perfectly, right? We offer grace and love because we know it's impossible. They're just learning how to use their legs, their muscles, and their bones are still forming, and bones may still be soft. So from this place of building crisis-proof faith, we don't let bitterness or resentment run in or set in. We still continue to affirm our worth and our value, because me knowing my worth and value was never required so-called allies. Hello, somebody. I ask the question again, do you want to be well? Do you want a healed mind? Do you want to heal the trauma? Do you want to heal your perception of the world? Now, last week I mentioned A Course in Miracles and spoke about how the work of Byron Katie, the work of A Course in Miracles and Eckhart Tolle serve us so well. And I want to zero in on A Course in Miracles specifically because there are two lessons that come to mind for me. One is lesson 27, above all else, I want to see. And that lesson is like an answer to the question, right? If you're saying, I want to be healed, if you're saying, yes, I want to develop crisis-proof faith, and I recognize that the time to prepare is now, I'm ready to weatherproof my mind, I'm weatherproofing my mind. I want to be well because I recognize that operating from an unhealed, unwell place has me jumping to conclusions. Operating from an unhealed, unwell place blocks me off from insight and guidance and inspired action. Operating from an unwell place cuts me off from my good, cuts me off from prosperity. Above all else, I want to see. And one of the things that's powerful in that lesson we read, vision has no cost to anyone. It can only bless. And this is important. Why? Because sometimes one of the things that begins to happen as we're talking about this idea of developing crisis-proof faith, you recognize that you may have to step away from people and things for a time. And that may seem like you're not being a beneficial presence on the earth. With all that's happening in the world, with all that's happening on the planet, it's like I need to be actively involved. But if you're actively unhealed, being actively involved is going to end up with scenarios and situations and outcomes that are not beneficial to you nor to those that you are trying to serve, center, or support. And so it's important to recognize that as you say, above all else, I want to see, as you're saying, yes, I want to be healed. It's important for you to know that it has no cost to anyone. You're not taking away from anyone as you put the focus of your attention on healing the trauma, as you put the focus of your attention on releasing the stress, as you put your focus of attention on releasing the wound, healing the wound, tending to your wound. I mean, we know this in the physical. If you broke your arm or if you broke your leg, you wouldn't be able to go out as much. You might have to step back for a while. You might have to hold your arm up in the air for a while, or your leg might have to sit up for a while. And we all understand that. That's okay, because that's part of healing. So it is the same with the non-physical wounds that are trauma. This is the goal. Not to fix the world or change the world, because when you change your mind, the world changes. When you change your mind, the world is blessed. Healing trauma has no cost to anyone, but it benefits everyone. Now, there's a related lesson, and it's actually an earlier lesson, lesson 20. So lesson 27 is above all else I want to see. Lesson 20 is I am determined to see. It's another way of saying yes to this question. Do you want to be well? Yes, I want to be well. I am determined. I am determined to see clearly. Above all else, I want to see. And in the text of I am determined to see, we read these words. We have not lost sight of the crucial importance of the reversal of your thinking. Again, unhealed perception. We need to reverse that thinking. We need to reverse that perception. The salvation of the world depends on it. You want salvation. You want happiness. You want peace. You do not have them now because your mind is totally undisciplined. And you cannot distinguish between joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain, love and fear. You are now learning how to tell them apart, and great indeed will be your reward. So we recognize that, and this is why it's important to understand and know this idea that vision has no cost to anyone, and you're not taking away from someone, but actually as you move into this process of learning and you're moving into the process of disciplining your mind, weatherproofing your mind, you will be able to really see what's going on, to distinguish what's really happening, to not immediately be pulled into anger by the latest news report, to not immediately be pulled into resentment or hatred at the latest bit of information, whatever something your partner says or does, right? All of these types of things, you will be able to take a breath and see it clearly. And indeed, great will be your reward. Now, there's a sentence I read there that I think is very important. You are now learning how to tell them apart. You are now learning. And this is a beautiful reminder. Why? Because if you are learning, you will make mistakes. If you are learning, there is grace to allow you to make mistakes. If you are learning, you will also give yourself grace because you're learning. If you are learning, that also means there will be ample time to practice. One of the images I love to conjure in this way when we think about we're learning. Life is written in pencil. And I say that from this vantage point, that when we're writing in pencil, we're never worried if we make a mistake. Why? Because at the end of every pencil is an eraser. And so you turn it over, you erase whatever mistake, and you keep going. And this is really how loving and graceful and compassionate life is. You are learning. You may not know it now. Your mind may not be weatherproof. You may be operating from an unhealed perception. You may be operating from unhealed trauma. All good. You're learning now how to reverse your thinking because it is of crucial importance. The salvation of the world depends on it. But again, not in the sense of you have to be the superhero. Just when you change your mind, the world changes. When you change your mind, the world is blessed. Healing trauma has no cost to anyone, but it benefits everyone. Now, I want to make this practical because I know that you get this and you understand it, and I'm seeing the comments. It's resonating. I'm happy to hear that, happy to see that. Now, in my closing, I'm going to give you a few book recommendations, but first I want to highlight a specific book that I think offers helpful steps in healing trauma and developing crisis-proof faith as we're talking about it today. And so the title of this book, and I'm going to give you the full title with the subtitle, How to Do the Work, Recognize Your Patterns, Heal from Your Past, and Create Yourself. This book is by Nicole LePera. Again, How to Do the Work, Recognize Your Patterns, Heal from Your Past, and Create Yourself. Wonderful book. And the thing that I love about it is that it does provide very practical steps in doing this work that we're talking about now, healing trauma, recognizing patterns, healing the past. Because the work of healing requires both an inside out and an outside in approach. If you just do one and miss the other, complete healing will not happen. And so what I love about what Nicole LePera provides in this text is a holistic approach, holistic psychology, which brings the focus on healing our body and our minds. And this approach affirms that you have agency and are an equal participant in your healing. Because sometimes if we just go a clinical route, it's like, here, take this pill and that'll dampen down your anxiety and depression symptoms. And then that's it, right? And we recognize that there's so much more that needs to happen. Again, an inside out and an outside in approach, holistic, both and approach. And so in this text, she offers some things that I want to highlight. The first will, of course, be very familiar because this takes us back even to what we were talking about last week with weatherproofing your mind, and the time to prepare is now. Become aware of our thoughts, which of New Thought supports us in doing that very well. Right. And of course, as I mentioned, A Course in Miracles is offering us the thought system of love, right? So as we become aware of our thoughts, we then replace those thoughts with thoughts that are loving, beneficial, life-supporting, and constructive. Now, in the book, she writes about a woman named Jessica who was able to move out of living on autopilot. Her thoughts were controlling her life in a way that she didn't realize. She wasn't happy, but she didn't know why. And actually, in sharing some of the things that Jessica did, one of the things that Jessica did is began to practice yoga. Right. So this was an embodied approach, right, where she's getting back into her body, but also releasing things by using the asanas, the poses in yoga. But also what she was doing was giving herself time. Right? She hadn't been giving to herself. And so by setting aside that time to practice yoga was making time for herself. And then in making that time for herself, she was able to become aware and hear her thoughts, hear those chronic thoughts that had been active for so very long that she realized she no longer wanted to hold on to. She was able to examine those thought patterns and release what was not serving her to create the life that she desired. Now, she also talks about identifying childhood trauma. Our childhoods are where we learned loving and unloving ways of being in the world. Most of this was absorbed in unconscious ways. How we deal with money, how we show up in relationships, the things that trigger us, all have roots in our early childhood experiences. Again, those can be beneficial and those can be destructive. Now, what's popular now is to simply be aware of this childhood trauma. This is who I am. Yeah, because, I experienced this as a child, so this is why I'm this way. And that's awareness. That's beautiful. That's part of it, right? Crisis-proof faith requires us to address and heal trauma. And so there are many people that are absolutely unaware of the ways in which their childhood and childhood trauma is playing out in their lives today as adults. There are another set of folks that are aware and they're saying, this is who I am. But the opportunity is to move from awareness and identification, which are the first steps, and then reach out to a therapist, start to do the work of healing. It's critically important that we do that. Now, she also talks about disarming survival systems. And this relates to childhood, again, in a specific way, but also you've heard me talk about it over and over again, this idea of living in the fight, flight, or freeze mode and moving out of that mode so that we can access the CEO of the mind, so we can hear the CEO of the mind. And so, of course, practices like learning the transcendental meditation technique, of course, as we just mentioned, practicing yoga have beneficial stress-releasing effects that support you in moving out of the fight, flight, or freeze mode. Because, see, these survival systems that we've cultivated, what's happening is our bodies and our bloodstream is filled with cortisol, which stresses us out. Right. And then that's what leads to so many of the leading causes of death, which are related to cardiovascular and heart disease. And so what we know to be true now and what research is showing us so clearly is there's so many different ways that we get to do that. Exercise is one of those things. Exercise is a necessary tool for stress reduction. Exercise, actually, that's what you should think about exercise. PY and I keep talking about this a lot as we are always focused on our health and fitness journeys. There's the misconnection of the benefits of exercise and working out. You can't outwork out your diet. Right. So it's like, oh, if I work out for hours and work out all of this time, then I'm going to lose weight. Working out is not what causes you to lose weight. But working out has powerful benefits, one being stress reduction. Working out has powerful benefits, another being building up and supporting muscle tone, right? Working out has powerful benefits for your bones, right? Working out has powerful benefits for your mental health, right? All of those things are true. This is why everyone should be doing some type of working out. And here's the thing, just take a walk. It doesn't have to be stressful or strenuous, right? If you're not trying to bulk up or beef up, you don't have to lift weights. You don't have to do anything like that. But simply that activity is a stress reducing activity, walking. It's good for your mental health. And so then it helps you to disarm these internal survival systems that you may have unknowingly cultivated, right? And so then you get to respond to life versus reacting. Another thing, and the other thing as it relates to diet and mental health, I was just reading a wonderful article in the National Geographic that was sharing some of the latest findings in terms of research. But we create more stress by eating certain foods, and we can increase our inner resilience by eating other foods. Again, the approach, it's inside out, outside in, it's holistic. So even what we eat has to do with healing trauma. Even what we eat helps us develop crisis-proof faith. Now, another thing she writes about is reparenting. No matter what your parents did or did not do, at this point in time, you have power and agency in your life. Remember, as Dr. Maté reminded us, the factual event cannot be changed, but the wound can be healed. So it's important that from that place of you can recognize what took place in your childhood, what you can recognize things that you would have loved to happen differently, what you can recognize of something you may not have received, you have the opportunity to reparent yourself. When you're reparenting, you apply loving discipline by making small promises to yourself and keeping them. You prioritize self-care and emotional regulation. Your wise and loving inner parent can witness and validate your authentic needs and feelings, and all of these actions help you to earn the trust of your inner child. Your inner child feels safe. By acknowledging your inner child and acknowledging their fears and acknowledging their survival mechanisms and acknowledging the ways in which they learned to navigate the world just so they would be safe, acknowledging the ways that they navigated the world just so that they could make sure that there was still a roof over their head and that the big people, the elders, didn't take away from them and withhold food or withhold money or withhold clothing, right? You can start to shift your once held painful beliefs. And so when we talk about healing trauma, reparenting may be involved. Now, the last thing I want to highlight from the book, How to Do the Work, she also talks about cultivating loving boundaries. And she gives us 3 different categories: physical boundaries, resource boundaries, and mental and emotional boundaries. And these are all very, very practical. So from the physical level, these relate to our bodily autonomy. And I think this is very important, particularly for those of us, if you've experienced any abuse. Your bodily autonomy is important, right? How we like to be touched or not touched. Also, what food we want to eat. This is something, again, this goes back to childhood, right? We were forced to eat things just because. We were shamed into eating things. Oh, you know, there's kids in some part of the world that don't have anything, right? Now, we know that our elders, they meant well, but it created something within us that may still be playing out today. Also, what self-care practices we find important for our bodies. This is beautiful, and this is why there are so many different ways to practice self-care. And so here, as we use the word boundary, you hear what's going on, right? This is not about blocking something. It's about choosing, again, how we like to be touched, what we want to eat, what self-care practices we find important for our bodies. Resource boundaries, being intentional about how and with whom we spend our time and money. Again, thinking about childhood, you didn't have those choices. There were places and spaces I know as a child I didn't want to go, and my parents tell some stories about how I didn't want to go. But ultimately, boy, get in the car. You know what I'm saying? I had no choice. I didn't feel like I had agency as a child. I'm sure many memories are coming up for so many of you in this moment. And so one of the ways that we get to heal trauma and reparent and heal our inner child is being intentional about how and with whom we spend our time and money, and also identifying the ways that in which we're going along to get along now. because that pattern had been developed in us so long. We still don't like it. We're kicking and screaming inside just like we were as a child, but we're doing the same things that the adults in our lives used to make us do. And so this is another place, cultivating loving boundaries, and finally mental and emotional boundaries, making space for your own feelings, opinions, and beliefs. I'm sure there are many of you, right? You weren't really allowed to have an opinion as a child. You weren't really allowed to have choices as a child. And some of you, if you voiced your opinion, you might have got hit, which then taught you something very clear, to just hush and be quiet. And so now you're at work and not offering your opinions. Now you're in a relationship and you're not offering your opinions. These are wounds that can be healed. Again, the factual event of what took place in your childhood, we can't change the factual event, but the wound can be healed. And one of the ways that we do this is to be intentional and loving with ourselves. We make space, we honor our feelings. We here at CSC, we honor feelings, right? We make space and we honor our opinions and our beliefs. And sometimes those beliefs, and particularly as you are a part of this spiritual community, I'm sure there are people in your family or other circles that don't believe as you do, right? Still hold on to certain traditional beliefs, whether it's Christianity or in any other religion. And so this is actually a loving boundary that is like, no, I don't believe that anymore, right? I love you. God bless you. Do what you want to do. But I don't believe that anymore. Do you want to be well? Crisis-proof faith requires you to heal trauma. Crisis-proof faith requires you to be well. Crisis-proof faith requires vision. Vision has no cost to anyone. It can only bless. When you change your mind, the world changes. When you change your mind, the world is blessed. Healing trauma has no cost to anyone, but it benefits everyone. Now, earlier I said I would recommend some additional books, right? So definitely, if this sermon resonates with you and you realize there's some things that you want to heal and there's some things that resonated, please get Nicole LePera's book, right? How to Do the Work. Wonderful text, right? And it'll support you. There's also stories, right, about different people. I mentioned the one young lady, Jessica, about how they applied each of these different principles and how they did the work. Some of you may have, as you've heard me talk, you may have been thinking about the book, The Body Keeps the Score, right, which became very popular 5 years ago in 2020. This is not a book that we recommend anymore, right? Although the title is true, The Body Keeps the Score, we recognize that the author is incredibly problematic and most likely plagiarized many of his ideas from a Black woman whose work predates his. So we'll just leave it there. We don't deal with him. But there are so many other texts that are in alignment that you can read and that will support you in your process of healing trauma. So the Black woman that I just mentioned, the book is The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke, again, whose work predates Body Keeps the Score, and many believe that parts of The Body Keeps the Score is plagiarized. The ideas are very, very close to the work of this Black woman. We also have another powerful book, My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. I'm sure many of you are familiar with his work. A wonderful book. And of course, I think this is also important that we're highlighting Black and brown folks, people of color. The final book I want to recommend is What My Bones Know by Stephanie Foo. These, again, will support you in understanding how trauma shows up in our lives, but more importantly, how we get to heal it, how we get to heal these wounds. Your healed mind will heal the world. Your healed mind will change the world. Your healed mind will save the world. But my question to you today is, do you want to be well? Do you want to be well? Do you want to be well? For this truth, I am so very grateful. And to this truth, I say amen, ashe, and so it is.